The reading we have today comes from Proverbs 9, verses 1 to 12. So if you have your Bibles, you're welcome to turn to that. Proverbs 9, 1 to 12. Yep. Okay. We'll start from verse 1. So it's called the Way of Wisdom in my Bible. It says, "Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. She has also furnished her table. She sent out her maidens. She cries out from the highest places of the city. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. As for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding." And then verse 7, "He who corrects a scoffer gets shame for himself, and he who rebukes a wicked man only harms himself. Do not correct a scoffer lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you will bear it alone." So I have a question for you all from that passage, and that is, are you wise? And I have the same question for myself, am I wise? And the reason I have that question, and that question's been on the back of my mind, ever since I read Proverbs 9, verse 8, back in my own quiet times last year, where it says, "Do not correct a scoffer, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you." And that verse made me think, how do I respond to correction and to rebuke? Do I respond like the wise man and love the person who corrected me? Or do I respond like the scoffer and harbor hate for them instead? I found it to be a very convicting question, because if I'm honest with myself, I don't often respond well to rebuke. And I think you'll get a sense of what I mean if I tell you what it was like when I got high school English essays back in school. I'd go into an exam, I would write my essay, I'd come out and be like, yeah, I think I did great, I made a really good argument, all this kind of thing. And then you get the essay back, and you get a mark that you don't like, and you get feedback and comments telling you everything you did wrong, and I'd get a bit defensive, right? Start arguing, oh, it's the marker, it's all subjective, it wasn't me. Now, maybe your experience of English essays was the same as mine, and maybe it wasn't. But I think we can all agree that there are times where we don't respond very well to correction and to rebuke. And according to this passage, how you respond to correction reveals a little bit about your wisdom. I think the fact that the wise respond positively to correction, it also tells us something about the nature of wisdom itself. Why do the wise value correction? What does that tell us about what wisdom means? So that's what I want to go through today. I want us to listen to what the Bible says about what characterizes a person who has wisdom. And then I want us to see why those characteristics reflect wisdom in the first place. And hopefully, after all that, we'll have a better idea of the nature of wisdom. Does that sound good to you? All right, let's begin. So we've already seen that the first characteristic of a wise person is that they're open to correction and rebuke. But why is that the case? How does being open to rebuke reflect wisdom? And if God is wise, does that mean God is open to rebuke too? I think there are 3 reasons why being open to rebuke is something that is a characteristic of at least human wisdom, as we'll say. The first is that a wise person loves the truth, and correction brings them closer to it. The second is that a wise person hates pride, and correction gives them a chance to act humbly. And the third is that a wise person knows that correction is for their good, and so they embrace it lovingly. Let's start with that first one. A wise person loves the truth, and correction brings them closer to it. So we hear more about wisdom from wisdom herself in Proverbs chapter 8, verses 7 to 8, which he says, "For my mouth will speak truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are with righteousness. Nothing crooked or perverse is in them." That wise person loves to speak the truth. And they absolutely hate to say anything that is wicked or evil or incorrect. And so if they have spoken something wrong and they get corrected, they absolutely love the person who corrected them because they always want to speak that truth. Now, I was recently reading a book, it's a very small, thin book, called The End of Thinking. And he talks about a very similar idea. In his book, he talks about how some people love to be right and other people love the truth. And the two might sound like the same thing, but there is a crucial difference. Someone who loves the truth welcomes questions. They welcome challenges and rebukes. They want questions as those questions force them to clarify their beliefs in as clear a manner as possible. They welcome challenges because this acts as a test of their belief. Is it actually true? And they love rebuke because ultimately they're not attached to their ideas, they're attached to the truth. And a rebuke helps them get closer to that. A person who wants to be right, however, disregards questions, scoffs at challenges, and despises those who rebuke them. Because ultimately, questions, challenges, and rebuke, they threaten their claim to being correct. And so they can only despise those who challenge them. So do I love truth? Do you love truth? Do you love it to the point that you love those who correct you? That is the first challenge. The second reason why being open to rebuke is a characteristic of wisdom is that a wise person hates pride and correction gives them the chance to act humbly. We read this in Proverbs 8, verses 12 to 13. "I, wisdom, dwell with prudence and find out knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance in the evil way, and the perverse mouth I hate." The wise soul hates pride. It hates arrogance, and so it accepts correction humbly. Have you ever heard of Socrates? Yeah? He was an ancient Greek philosopher, a long, long time ago. And he was considered by other philosophers to be one of the greatest and wisest of their time. But what made him so wise? If you hear the stories, according to Socrates, it was his humility. There is a story about Socrates, it's in a whole book, but it's sort of summarized in this one quote. "The ancient oracle said that I was the wisest of all the Greeks. It is because I alone of all the Greeks know that I know nothing." Socrates' claim here is that his wisdom stemmed from one thing: his recognition that he actually doesn't know that much. In Socrates' mind, the wisest a man can be is to realize that he doesn't know anything. Now, Christian wisdom is a bit different to this. Christians can be wiser than Socrates. Even the youngest Christian can be wiser than the wisest Greek philosopher because they have God's word. Psalm 19:7 puts it this way: "The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple." Christians are made wise by following God's law and God's way, not just by recognizing their own lack of knowledge. But in doing that, Christians are wise to recognize their own weakness, their own limitations, and their own submission to God's wisdom and God's strength. Proverbs 3:7 recognizes this and says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." For a Christian, the ultimate source of wisdom is not themselves. A Christian's ultimate source of wisdom is God. So when another person comes and corrects us, the wise believer is able to love that person because what's been corrected is their own error, their own mistake, and what is being accepted is God's truth. Now, I think this point is especially important when we are correcting each other about biblical truths. I think we have the greatest tendency to become scoffers and to hate others when we argue about biblical things. Should women cover their heads in church? Should they preach in meetings? Should we break bread once a week, or is once a month okay? Is it biblical to baptize a child, or is baptism only for adults? If you caught yourself thinking, of course the answer is this, how could anyone else think otherwise? Then you might be sounding a little bit like a scoffer. I'm sure that you're convinced that what you believe is true, and I'm glad that's the case. But would you be open to rebuke on the off chance that you were wrong? Would you be able to love a brother or sister who disagrees with you and tries to persuade you otherwise? I think that's the difference between someone who is wise and someone who isn't. The wise person embraces these disagreements because ultimately it helps them get to the truth. And they humbly recognize that they might not already know that truth. The third reason why being open to rebuke is a characteristic of wisdom is that a wise person knows that correction is for their good and so embraces it lovingly. This last one is particularly about being corrected on your actions, maybe, as opposed to your ideas. But Proverbs tells us time and time again that the wise love correction. Proverbs 27, verses 5 to 6 says, "Open rebuke is better than love, carefully concealed. Faithful are the words of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." In Proverbs 25:12 we read, "Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is the rebuke of a wise judge to a listening ear." And in Proverbs 3:11 to 12 we read the advice, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights." And all of these proverbs are probably most succinctly summarized in Proverbs 12:1. "Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid." Yep, that's in the Bible. Proverbs shows us that correction is for our good, whether that comes from human fathers, wise judges, a friend, or God himself. Proverbs recognizes that the act of correction, or discipline itself, is not pleasant. It's not something you enjoy at the time, but it's worth it for its fruit. Accepting correction is enduring temporary pain for long-term gain. And there aren't many things wiser than that. The Proverbs also recognizes that correction is a gift that takes time and energy from the giver. There is a reason that Proverbs 25:12 describes rebuke as an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold. Rebuke is a costly gift because, as we saw at the start, if you rebuke the wrong person, they might turn around and hate you. And so generally in life, no one is willing to rebuke you unless they love you. That is why Proverbs 3:12 says, "For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights." Parents correct you for your own good. And the more they love their kids, the more they do this, as they want what is best for them. And this is also why Proverbs 27:6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." A friend is willing to correct you, even if it hurts, because they want what's best for you. Whereas an enemy, on the other hand, will happily tell you that everything you are doing is correct because your well-being is not their priority. And I think it's amazing how far we've moved away from this mentality in this modern world. We live in a world where our experience is the number one source of truth, and so any correction is seen as hostile. And if you don't believe me, try Googling, "Why do friends correct you?" 9 out of the 10 results that I got gave negative reasons and assumed this correction was an annoyance. Only one source actually believed that friends corrected you because they wanted the best for you. It's true what James 3:13 to 18 says. The world's wisdom is nothing like God's wisdom. Wisdom from above values correction. Okay, so our response to correction is one test of wisdom, but what are the others? Well, I'd say that another common refrain, something we see time and time again in the Proverbs, is that a wise man is a diligent man, and a foolish man is a lazy man. There's a nice rendering in Proverbs 6 to 11, which encourages the lazy person to look at the diligence of ants for their inspiration. It says, Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. And for all of the women out there, the famous Proverbs 31 passage describes a wise woman and is full of praise for her diligence. Verses 13 to 16 says, she seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She's like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it, and from her profits she plants a vineyard. Proverbs has endless praise for the diligent, and the diligence of the wise in particular, and endless scorn for the laziness of the foolish. So why is this the case? Why is diligence, hard work, so closely tied to wisdom? I'd suggest that the main reason is that the diligent are conscious of providing for the future, whereas the lazy person is only thinking about the present. And the writer of the Proverbs clearly believes that future planning is a wise thing to do. But let's explore that a bit more. Did you notice how future-focused those passages were? When the writer instructs us to look at the ants in chapter 6, he notes that the ants gather their food in the harvest. Now, if you're a farmer, you live on a farm, harvest season only really comes once a year. But you have to eat all year round. So the diligent and the wise soul, they harvest not just for now, but for the rest of the year to come. And it's also worth noting that when he commends and praises the ant, he says, having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer. The wise soul isn't just diligent, they also take initiative. They don't just do what they're told, they know what needs to be done, and they're willing to do it. The Proverbs 31 passage was also very future-focused. In verse 15, we read of the woman waking up while it is still nighttime to provide food for the household. The wise and diligent woman was willing to endure the pain of an early start in order to provide for her family later in the day. And verse 16 also shares this concept, with the wise woman purchasing a field and using its future profits to plant a vineyard. Clearly, the writer believes that it is wise to be diligent and to plan for the future. But where does God fit into all of this? Someone might say that it seems like the writer of the Proverbs is so focused on our work that he doesn't appear to be leaving any room for God and his provision. But I think there are 4 reasons why the writer believes both in the diligence and planning, whilst also at the same time believing in God and his provision and control. And so the 4 points are, the first one, the capacity to work is given by God. I'm only able to work because God has made me able. The wisdom to work is given by God. Number 3, the relationship between work and provision has been set by God. God is the one who made that order. And number 4, the diligent still trust their future to God, no matter how hard they work. Now let's start with number 1. The capacity to work is given by God. While it's true that the writer of the Proverbs believes that the wise are diligent, it's also true that he believes that their ability to work comes from God. One place where we read about this a lot is the book of Ecclesiastes. We read it time and again in that book that the ability to work and to enjoy your work is something that has been given by God. For example, in Ecclesiastes 5, verses 18 to 19, the preacher says, "Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him the power to eat it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God." The wise and diligent worker knows that their ability to work and their ability to enjoy that work is a gift from God. But the writer of the Proverbs also knows that the wisdom to work is given by God. In Ecclesiastes 2:26 we read, "For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight." Any wisdom that a man has, any wisdom that I have or you have, and any knowledge a man has, ultimately comes from God. I mean, Solomon's story himself is an example of this. God gave Solomon the choice to ask for anything he could have wanted, any amount of wealth or riches or power or anything. And ultimately, Solomon chose wisdom. And how did God respond? God was pleased with his request and made him wiser than any king that ever lived. Daniel and his 3 friends did the same. They put their faith in God. They didn't eat that king's meat. They put themselves on that diet. And God made them 10 times as wise as any of their peers. Proverbs 9, the passage we read, gives us a nice summary of this, saying that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And in case someone thinks that this is just an Old Testament idea, James plainly states it in James chapter 1, verse 5, where he says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." The wise and diligent soul then knows that their wisdom comes from God. Thirdly, the wise person knows that the relationship between work and provision is something that has been set by God. Now, someone might say that it's unbiblical to say that hard work tends to lead to success, or that laziness tends to lead to hunger, because maybe God will send a disaster to the person who worked hard, or maybe he'll send good fortune to the person who is lazy. It's possible. And even though those things might happen, Proverbs recognizes a general order in our creation, an order that God has set since the foundations of the world. The Apostle Paul calls on the same thing when writing to the Galatians, in Galatians 6, verse 7, saying, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." The physical act of farming teaches us this. There are natural consequences to what we sow and natural consequences to our actions. If I sow an orange seed, could I possibly expect an apple tree to grow? If I sow a field of wheat, could I expect to harvest a field of corn? Surely not. And the reason is that God created a natural order of things. We see this order that God has set in place when he first made the world at the beginning of creation. Multiple times in Genesis 1, we read that the phrase, "according to its kind." God made the grass, the herbs, the trees, and every living thing to produce seed according to its kind. Our God is a God of order. He made the world this way, and it is wise for us to notice this. But the last reason that the writer of the Proverbs can still commend diligence is that he knows that the wise and diligent soul still trusts their future to God. Even though it's true that God gave us the ability to work, and it's true that God gave us the wisdom to work, and it's also true that God has set up this relationship between hard work and fruit, God still wants us to trust him and not our diligence. Ecclesiastes 11 shows this balance nicely, saying, "As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good." The preacher knows that life is full of many circumstances that are beyond our control, beyond our knowledge, and beyond what we can actually do. It's possible that we might work hard and plant lots of seed, but factors beyond our control, like the wind or the fertility of the ground, mean that very little can grow. But that should not discourage us from working. Our conclusion should not be, "I cannot know exactly what the future will be, so I will give up." No, our conclusion should be that we should work hard and try different things because we do not know what God will make prosper. Ultimately, we work in the knowledge that God is in control, that any success or reward we get comes from him. And this acknowledgement of God is important because without it, our diligence becomes not wisdom, but foolishness. In Luke 12, Jesus tells the parable of a rich man who was very good at future planning, but he left God out of the picture entirely. And for that, Jesus called him not wise, but a fool. Verse 16, then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will these things be which you have provided? His plan sounds reasonable, right? I have enough wealth, now I can retire early and enjoy life. But what he forgot was that it was God who gave him this wealth. And it was God who gave him this life. And it was God who just as easily can demand it from him. He was foolish because he missed one key factor, and that is God. And that brings us to our last point. The wise soul seeks God, whereas the fool says in their heart that there is no God. In Psalm 14:1, we read that phrase, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And Psalm 14 verse 2, we read, the Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. The wise soul seeks God. They look for God in every circumstance, God's will in every decision. The foolish one, however, says in their heart that there is no God. They look to themselves in every circumstance. They look at their own will in every decision. Ultimately, the question is God the Lord of your life? Do you see God as your king? Do you seek to please him and obey him and do his will? This is wisdom. And that is why that phrase, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, is what we read earlier on. The wise soul seeks to do God's good and perfect will. So, are you wise? Are you open to the rebuke of others? Do you love truth, hate pride, and know that correction is ultimately for your good? Are you diligent? Do you work hard to provide for those around you, knowing that the capacity to work is given by God, the wisdom to work is granted by God, and that ultimately any fruits of your work come from God? And do you seek God? Do you set him as Lord of your life and seek his will in everything you do? It's a high bar, one that you and I almost certainly do not live up to. But that leads us to one more question. Do you pray and ask God for wisdom, for the power and desire to seek his will and the strength to diligently do it? Because we know that if any of us lacks wisdom, we can ask God and he will give it to us liberally and without reproach. Let's pray.